Hello, welcome to Gladys Cake Kitchen. My name is Gladys, baker and cake artist, and over here I make simple, informative tutorials to help you navigate cake decorating easily. I also make sit-down videos talking about all things cake, handing you foolproof tips and techniques to help you level up your baking and decorating skills. So if you're new here, hello and welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. And hopefully you can check the list and catalog of tutorials to help pick yourself some well-tested recipes and foolproof techniques to help you throughout your baking and decorating career. Today is Sunday, and normally Sunday I would have a video out. Unfortunately, this week's video is not ready yet, so I thought I'll sit and do a quick live so we can talk through some subjects about cake. I've just come back from church, and normally I'd be in a white t-shirt, but I haven't managed to get that yet. So this is just me on a Sunday when I am not behind the camera doing cake related stuff. But it's exciting to have you this Sunday evening, and we're talking all things cake. The purpose of this meeting though is to discuss cake pricing, and I kind of feel like I have stirred up some conversation and probably thrown a grenade in the subject of cake decorating, because I made this cake right here and decided to go on a project, a research project for that matter. As a cake maker, I think most cake makers would agree that the most important value in cake decorating is time, the amount of time it takes to make a cake. The baking and decorating aspect is all fun, but when you're running a business, it's key to have an idea about the time for decorating and everything else that goes into the business to essentially account for the time for making cakes. So the backstory of this subject about cake pricing came about a little while ago when I was in a caking pricing group, specifically tailored for cake makers who have pricing inquiries. I think cake pricing is such a conundrum in the business of cake making. Everybody has something to say about cake pricing, and you'll find out that it's not always the same. It's not like a one-stop formula that works from A to B, and it's just different people and different formula and different mindsets about how they derive their pricing. So I am constantly seeing like wars between people coming at each other about how they derive their pricing in their cake business. And this day was not an unusual day. In fact, it was one of the regular days. In a cake pricing group, it is to be expected. So I was in this group where someone posed a post, and essentially their post was about a cake that they had quoted for. It was a 70-pound cake. Essentially, a customer had brought a cake photo of a particular cake similar to the one I have made here, and they wanted this YouTube themed cake for I think about 18 to 20 people, I believe, and it had to be made like a YouTube cake essentially, and it was a 6-inch 4-layered cake. This cake maker, a professional, I believe, quoted 70 pounds, and the customer unsurprisingly said that was expensive. So as a result, they declined to go through with the order altogether. Perhaps disheartened, the cake maker thought they'd come to the caking group for some reassurance and some clarity about whether their cake was indeed really that expensive. So in the post, I think I saw about 38 posts under the subject, and gosh, the opinions about the prices varied greatly from one spectrum to the other. I think the least price that someone suggested they'll be charging was about 115 pounds, and the most someone was suggesting was about 350 pounds for a 6-inch 4-layered cake. But the picture representative for this cake maker to derive a similar cake from was nearly the size of this. Normally, I'm not a cake maker who is quick to assert my prices on other cake makers, because it is such a nuanced subject area, especially in cake decorating, depending on your skill, your expertise, years in business, experience, how you shop for your ingredients, location. Many factors actually go into the subject of pricing cakes. So I think sometimes when I see cake makers having conversations about pricing, it is normally unhelpful because the subject goes from how individualized we all are in our pricing projects to actually querying why we charge certain prices as individuals. So cake maker A may come at cake maker B asking why they think it's justifiable to charge for, say, a cake that cake maker B believes should be £90, and querying exactly why cake maker A is charging £60 for that matter. And then cake maker A is coming at cake maker B to say, okay, why are you charging this price? And it's almost always like coming at each other and trying to nitpick at each other instead of actually identifying what factors contribute to a person deriving their price. So for instance, in my circumstance, as a custom cake maker, there's a lot of cakes I turn down for good reason and perhaps for personal reason. Cakes that are not too intricate to make and are not exactly artistically exciting for me are not cakes that I would normally make. So if I made, say, a drip cake, it is very occasional and there's an intention for it, and sometimes I just feel like that's the order the customer is asking for. And much of my very simplest cakes have been made for people I know who I want to help out instead of actually taking an order. So the simple cake, as in a simple drip cake with bare minimum items on it, are barely the cakes that represent my business. But perhaps another cake customer may specialize in these types of cake. And for general cakes that do not take into account like specific dietary elements as in gluten free and stuff like that, you'll find that ingredients for making a cake are particularly nearly the same or similar. So if you stock up in bulk, it might affect how you price your cakes, because you are not always going out on the market to shop for items back and forth specifically for a particular cake. So if you streamline your business to a certain type of cake that is your consistent order, then it makes it easier. You can shop online, you can do bulk shopping once a month or consistently at a specific time, so that you're not always burning time doing like other cake related tasks. Also, you can cut time by baking in bulk, looking at the amount of orders you have in a week, and you can make your buttercream in bulk. So these are all ways that an established business may consider cutting back on time and making their business a lot more efficient, thereby affordable for the customer. But that may not be the same for everybody. And whilst I engage some of these activities to cut back time, generally some of my cakes require some custom elements which will take time. So back to the post in the caking group. Whilst a cake maker, when I looked at the £70 price that this particular cake maker assigned for the 4-layered 6-inch cake, even though I had questions about it, I still thought, well, maybe they might have good reason, but perhaps let me just run a quick experiment. And it's a deviation from actually applying my own pricing formula to the subject matter, and then step out and do something different. And doing something different means I had to look at the whole task process of the cake making process, if you like. So the task starts from when the inquiry is received, whether you're just going to text a customer quickly or you're going to give them a call. So essentially from that point, and then organizing your ingredients down to the last task when the cake is boxed and handed over. When you've done it over and over and over again, and it has become part of your life, you almost forget how much time you spend doing some of these small, thankless but repetitive tasks. Also, the more you do it, consistency builds competence. So you get competent at managing your time, and some things you can do so easily and so quickly it almost doesn't affect anything. So perhaps the more experienced you are, the better you are at managing your time, the better you arrive at precisely a pricing that you may deem efficient and helpful for your customer. But that may still not be the case for everybody. So I decided to start from the top way down. And I think 11 hours in, I was left with more questions than answers. It actually forced me to confront my own cake pricing and probably accept that my cake pricing needed an overhaul. As a result, I threw this question back in my caking group to see what other people will price for their cakes, why that is, and how they arrived. I think I'm left a little bit frustrated at this point about the post in the group, because I found that most people have lost their mind on what the intention for the post is. Instead of focusing on how the 11 hours of work came about to make this cake, they are getting back at each other and why unjustifiable 11 hours means, which is not exactly the point. So back to the 11 hours of cake. Here's the cake that took 11 hours to make, and I'm not saying it is any special cake. In fact, the cake has imperfections, and that is by design, to represent a cake that a bare beginner is likely to make, because I didn't want the outcome of the cake to be exactly influenced by my own skill level. So the intention for making the cake came from assigning myself a £10.42 minimum wage to every hour that I spent on the cake. So I was very reluctant to round off time, as in 15 minutes, or charge half an hour for. What I did was I noted all the time scales and added them all together, and then derived my time from it, which gave me the 11 hours and a few minutes over. But then again, I just stuck to the 11 hours. So in terms of the breakdown, for instance, normally when I receive an inquiry, I would email. My inquiries would normally come mostly via email and occasionally via text. And I would normally respond by requesting more information about this particular order. And then a conversation is initiated back and forth. At least it can take up to about half an hour. Half an hour meaning a conversation here that is not prompt and quick, to a conversation that actually ensues for me to come back, derive an email concerning the conversation, which will include an order summary, send it back for the customer to confirm, and then I'll derive an invoice, send it back to them. Blink and half an hour will be gone. So with that, the consultation and the planning time, it doesn't necessarily mean I'll have to sit and sketch the image, but recognizing what it needs and then just having an idea of what the organization and breaking down my tasks. It's also me putting some time into the cake. So for that, I allocated an hour for that. And that would come to the consultation and pre-planning phases. When I put that in the group, some of my beloved cake maker friends came back with their comments as they don't do consultations. Consultation is just a word to say I'm engaging with a customer on a certain level. It doesn't necessarily mean you're having a whole sit down and meeting the customer to have a lengthy consultation. Consultation is the act of engaging with the customer to have an understanding of their preferences. And if any cake maker supposes that they receive an inquiry and just like that do not have any sort of interaction with the customer before making the cake, I would be greatly concerned, because how are you then able to establish like dietary needs and specific elements that you may need? And for me, I think it would be important for the customer to confirm for me what their preferences are, even though they have written it out, because more often than not in my business, I have found how helpful it has been to me that I speak to a customer, and wherever possible I am able to establish some sort of communication before I can confirm the order. But I found that in my post on the my caking group on the subject, the idea of a consultation is somehow lost in translation here, and it is assumed to be this thing where it's probably unnecessary, but each to their own. That aside, there is also shopping to do. For this cake though, I had already gone ahead to make the cake and the buttercream in advance before the video idea came to mind. Nonetheless, I worked out the travel time from mine to my nearest shop to buy cake and ingredients, something I have done and something you'll find I did somewhere along the video, because when the video idea came, I do not have a stock of chocolate elements and some ingredients at home, so I had to go shopping in my local shop and to Hobbycraft. That in its entirety took me about 1 hour and 20 minutes to and from, and for queuing, including some of the things that I shopped for to get this out. So an hour and a half for shopping, actually, when you have nothing at home but shopping for cake and ingredients, is not exactly unrealistic. Then there was the big time prepping for ingredients, sorting out the ingredients, measuring what is necessary, breaking your eggs, measuring your buttercream ingredients, and getting organized for when you start baking, and then through that into the buttercream and all of that in between. For me, my bake time is the prep time was about 40 minutes. So at this point, 1 hour for consultation and pre-planning, invoicing and all of that, an hour and a half for shopping to and from back for basic ingredients, 40 minutes for organizing and prepping for baking, and we're running over 2 hours already. You take 2 hours away from the completed bake time, which is nearly 11 hours here, and you can see where the time goes very quickly. It kind of makes sense when you stop and think about where the time goes. So 40 minutes for all of the organizing, pre-baking organization, including wiping down and cleaning out. I know some of my baker friends are quick to say, I do this in bulk. It's different when you are staying organized and you have a structured business, you have an expected number of orders. But it's also important to realize that the notion that this is how you run your business started from when you didn't have all these processes. So what would this look like for a complete beginner transitioning into cake making? Because it's almost like a luxury when you are able to then have an entire system to support your business and make it efficient, successful for you. So as a result, I am not guilty on the time that I spent on the cake. Essentially, if I were to make this cake myself as a business, I would find a way to cut down the time. But the entire research was based on what in actuality cake making and the process from start to finish looked like. So an hour, 40 minutes into tidying and doing all of that. And bake time in terms of mixing ingredients, in terms of mixing your ingredients and then having it in the oven, is exactly an hour and 15 minutes. For me, that hour and 15 minutes means I can also do a batch of buttercream, which takes me up to about 30 minutes. The ingredients, mind you, have already been measured, but getting it sorted and taking it out from start to finish would probably be absorbed by the time the baking is done. Occasionally, I'm also able to do washing up and tidy my kitchen quickly. So the prep and bake time alone from start to finish, including buttercream, for me, even as a professional, can take just about 4 hours or a little under, maybe 3.5, but 4 hours is reasonable to expect from start to finish, including when I have started doing nothing to actually finishing my task and tidying up and knowing I have no residual tasks. And that's 4 hours. So adding consultation for an hour, that is 5 hours. Adding shopping, and that is 6.5 hours to go already. So 11 hours almost seems a little very justifiable at this point, but somehow I think that detail is lost with my fellow cake makers over there. Having said that, I continued the cake making process until I got to the finished point. Now, the formula for cake pricing is not a one rule fits all. Naturally, the assumption is for naturally the formula is for one to have all the ingredients and entire cost, including utilities, sundries, all other elements, and derive a final cost of that. Add a profit margin to that cost, derive a percentage for profit, add it to the entire cost, and that will be the price of the cake. For this cake, like I said, I paid myself £10.42. That is the national minimum wage in the UK for a working adult, for any job you'd be doing. So I thought I will assign that to my projects here. But that's not what is to be charged for cakes generally if you have such a high skill and experience to bring to the cake. So normally, depending on what cake I'm making, you're looking at about 15 to 25 pounds per hour for my kind of skill and level. I'm nearly like a decade in, and I'd like to think my skills are more refined, which means I have to pay myself to reflect the skill that I bring to the work I do. But that's not the case for this particular case, because I was looking to establish the intention for, say, a beginner baker, and to focus on the time and see how realistic that our pricing, even per hour and against our own skill, is. So for that matter, if I were to pay myself £25 for a cake, especially looking at the presentation of the cake not being top tier, I don't think I could justify paying myself £25 for a cake that looks almost bare minimum here. So it would have taken a lot more time to polish. I would have had to put the decorations better, and that would require more of me. But I still don't think for this cake I would have assigned a £25 charge for myself. But that is just saying, I also wouldn't have charged myself £10.42 either way. But if we work out £10.42 minimum wage against 11 hours of work, the starting price of this cake is almost hitting the £100 mark and over, and other expenses haven't been included just yet. We haven't added our cost of ingredients for cake and buttercream, the boards, our sundries, our utilities, and all other things, including business costs. So how much will this cake actually cost in its entirety? When I did the maths, we were running over a minimum of at least 190 to about 225 pounds for this cake. And I'm sure if I put that up in my group, I'm likely to receive some sort of pushback for that. I noticed also when I was in my caking group, the subject matter of the pricing has deviated from where we are spending our time and how we can justify that, which is right, to, like I said earlier, coming at each other and trying to pick apart why we are charging the prices we're charging. That doesn't seem to help anyone in the long run, especially in our fields. In cake baking, I find cake making is one of those enterprises where customers feel at ease telling us how we should price our cakes. And this problem is more problematic when you have other cake makers telling other cake makers how to price their cakes, whether they're pricing lower or they should price higher. I think there is a case to be made for the intention to encourage each other to price our cakes better, because in the long term that supports all of us in the industry and helps to sift out customers who just want to take our time and take advantage of us. So whilst the £70 price was noted by this customer, this cake maker, to the customer, which I thought was cheap, I really was reluctant to put my enforce my opinion at her. But more also, I undertook the challenge just to prove the point that if it's a confidence problem or uncertainty that is causing you to charge your cakes less than their worth, then perhaps have something evidence-based to consider that when you're charging for the cakes and you know that there is some sort of justifiable action or tangible evidence to prove why you're charging, then perhaps that will go a long way to help you. So here's a question for you if you're watching this live or if you're watching this on replay. How much would you, if you're a cake maker, charge for this cake, and why? The the video that I'm making on the subject is delayed, obviously, but it will be out. And when it does, I will put all the data about the time, the breakdown of the cost, and how I made the cake from start to finish. So yeah, there should be more information for us to learn from, and for us to have some information which will back pricing and all cake related charges as pertaining to this cake. But for you, what is your, how much would you charge for this cake and why? And what's your experience? How many years have you been in business for cake making? I'm excited to know, I'm curious to know about this, and excited to also know more about this conundrum about pricing, just so that we can all help to support each other. In the meantime, if anyone from my cake group here is watching, the idea was not to come at anyone. It's more for us to engage with the subject matter, to ask ourselves some difficult questions, to identify ways to encourage each other so that we can price our work better. But I know pricing is boring, having to break down every ingredient per unit and derive a cost for that and assign it. Most of us just want to bake a cake. We're not mathematicians or economists trying to figure out the business side. But I also wonder why pricing is such a huge issue. Is it a confidence thing? Is it an experience thing? Is it that we just don't want to bother with it and we just want to bake? No wonder a lot of us are closing our business and just not breaking even or making profits at all. It is a hard subject matter to tackle, and as I found out this evening, I found out that talking about the subject of cake pricing is not as exciting for me, and it's also such a precarious area where I can easily get frustrated. So being able to bring the subject matter on live here to discuss it is something that is heartwarming. With that said, I think for some of the times that we're looking at, for instance, for say shopping for the ingredients on top of the cake, we were looking at 1 hour and 22 minutes, and actually the fondant, like pre-rolling the fondant. So let's look at washing up and tidying for when the cake was stacked and layered was about 30 minutes. Trimming and covering the cake took about 28 minutes. Cutting and polishing the cake took 20 minutes, if you like. And fondant took about 24 minutes. Except the cleaning and all other things did add up. So, like I said, when the video comes out, there will be more information about this cake. I wanted to be able to cut this cake so we can see the servings on the cake. But I also realized that I'm a one-man production, and getting up means that I'll be cut off and communication will be affected, and I won't be able to show you what I want to show you properly. So I'll end the live here, but I'll be back to create either the servings in shorts form. So I can tell you how much this cake actually serves, how many it serves, and the final price for that cake. But I just wanted to jump on the live to talk about my intention for doing the project, running the project, research project for that matter, and why that is, and where we got to for that. Took 11 hours. Can you believe 11 hours for this random cake here that looks like it needs a bit more work, you know? So yes, it's a pleasure to have you. I hope I've been able to bring you some information and context about cake pricing over here. And check the catalog of tutorials I already have, and a few other baking basics live ones that I have done on this channel. And I'll see you in my next video. Thanks for being here.